She brought a bulldozer to my gate, said it violated the community's aesthetic. I wasn't even in her HOA, but I had cameras, receipts, and a plan. What started as petty control turned into a courtroom war that shattered her empire. This isn't just revenge, it's architectural justice. I bought the land because it felt like freedom. 2 acres of rolling Colorado hillside with ponderosa pines and one hell of a view of the mountain ridge. I had spent the better part of 20 years designing dream homes for wealthy clients who argued about tile grout while claiming they valued creative expression. I finally decided I deserved a place where I could build exactly what I wanted. No beige vinyl siding, no cookie-cutter plans, no committees voting on my choice of mailbox. The house I built was a personal manifesto, a sleek black steel structure with huge panes of tempered glass, slatted wood walls the color of toasted cedar, and a gate that looked like a sculptural installation. Curved metal spines rising like frozen fire. The fence flowed out from the gate, tall enough to keep privacy, elegant enough to make architects nod approvingly. It cost me more than $300,000, which made it not just a fence, but the most expensive middle finger I had ever raised to conformity. And the best part? I wasn't part of any homeowners association. The previous owner of this plot had refused inclusion when the surrounding development, Whispering Pines Estates, was first proposed, and the county boundaries still reflected that. The HOA's jurisdiction ended across the street. My land was my land, legally, structurally, spiritually. The first letter arrived 2 weeks after I finished construction. A stark white envelope, official-looking enough to trigger mild anxiety. Inside, a typed notice full of cheerful authoritarianism. Your gate and fence violate the architectural harmony of our community. Please repaint your exterior in an approved neutral tone and replace your fencing with an HOA-compliant style within 30 days. I snorted out loud and tossed it into the recycling. Honest mistake. Someone mixed up the addresses. The second letter arrived 4 days later, this one with bold print announcing second notice like I'd committed a felony. They added a list of violations. Fence too tall. Materials not in line with suburban rustic aesthetics. Gate style threatening. That one I kept, mostly because threatening gate amused me so much I planned to frame it. On the 5th morning, a white SUV parked at the end of my driveway. Out stepped a woman in her 50s with a severe blonde bob and a clipboard hugged to her chest like a Bible. Her leggings and designer sneakers screamed, "Yoga mom with a Napoleon complex." She marched toward me while I was pruning the young pines at the gate. "Good morning," she declared with the kind of smile people use when they're about to ruin your day. "I'm Karen Dolton, president of the Whispering Pines Estates Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your violations." "My what now?" I wiped sap off my gloves, trying not to laugh. She tapped aggressively on her clipboard. "This fencing is not approved, and that color," she gestured dramatically toward my matte black facade, "is not authorized within the community. You must comply with our design standards." "Karen," I said, savoring the name like a sour candy, "my property isn't part of Whispering Pines. I'm not in your HOA." Her eyes narrowed. The clipboard rose slightly like a shield. "All homes visible from within the community are subject to our covenants. Visual integrity is critical to property values. We can't have this." She waved again at my home like it was obscene. "Bringing us down." "Property values will survive my front gate," I assured her. "And again, not part of the HOA." She inhaled sharply, the way someone does right before sending an email in all caps. "You'll be hearing from us again. Non-compliance has consequences." "I love consequences," I said, smiling as politely as I could. She turned sharply and stomped back to her SUV, nearly tripping on a rock. I might have enjoyed that too much. As the engine faded down the road, I looked at my hand-built gate glowing in the afternoon sun and thought, this is going to be entertaining, because if there's one thing I can't resist, it's a bully with a rule book. And Karen was clearly the queen of rules. For a week or so after Karen's little driveway performance, things were quiet. Too quiet. I knew better than to think she'd just let it go. Not with her clipboard pride wounded and her architectural sensibilities still bleeding over my threatening gate. And sure enough, the HOA came back swinging, this time with a barrage of bureaucratic nuisance. It started with a thick envelope stuffed into my mailbox. Not mailed, hand-delivered. Inside were printed violations, photographs of my property clearly taken without my knowledge, and a strongly worded letter asserting that I owed the HOA $500 per day for non-compliance. The total fine, as of that date, $3,500. Retroactive to the first letter. Impressive math for an organization that couldn't grasp the concept of jurisdiction. I poured myself a coffee, opened my laptop, and forwarded everything to my real estate attorney, Nora. She was sharp, fast, and had the perpetual resting face of someone who ate petty bureaucrats for breakfast. After reviewing the documents, she called me back laughing. "They can't fine you," she said, still chuckling. "You're not a member. They have no authority and no covenant applies to your lot. You're clean." "Should I respond?" I asked. "No. Let them keep walking into their own trap. But keep everything they send. Every letter, every flyer, every ridiculous accusation. Trust me, it's going to come in handy." So I started a file labeled Karen and the Cult of Beige. I printed every document, organized them chronologically, and even installed a little wall shelf in my studio to hold the growing archive. It became a ritual. HOA harassment, print, file, pour a drink. Then came the surveillance. I caught the first one on a Tuesday morning. A middle-aged guy in cargo shorts loitering across the street, pretending to jog in place while holding up his phone. He wasn't subtle. When I stepped out with my coffee mug and gave him a friendly wave, he immediately turned and power-walked away, holding his phone chest high like a body cam. The next day, someone parked a Prius a few houses down and aimed a dash cam directly at my home. That night, I found a drone hovering near my upper windows. It buzzed off when I stepped outside with a flashlight. But I wasn't about to let this turn into a Peeping Tom community project. I bought and installed 4 ultra-high-definition security cameras with night vision and motion detection. One faced the driveway, one faced the gate, and the other 2 covered the perimeter. I connected them to a server with cloud backup. I wasn't just going to protect myself, I was going to collect evidence like a goddamn nature documentary on HOA insanity. The footage started rolling in, Karen walking by 3 times a day, photographing the gate with exaggerated disgust, another board member trying to peer over my fence with binoculars, a woman in a tennis skirt tossing a crumpled HOA flyer over the fence onto my lawn. They were escalating. The next phase was social. Karen turned to Nextdoor and the Whispering Pines Facebook group, where she posted photos of my home with captions like, "Eyesore alert, new neighbor building house of nightmares. And don't let one man destroy our community's integrity." It got traction. Keyboard warriors chimed in with comments like, "We should call the city on him, and it's ruining the whole aesthetic." Someone even posted that I was probably running an unlicensed Airbnb for drug dealers. Subtle. Then came the concerned neighbors. One woman knocked on my door and asked if I planned to fix the color scheme to match the block. Another told me her grandchildren were scared of my dark gate. I offered to loan them flashlights. I stayed calm, collected footage, saved screenshots, labeled everything. I wasn't angry. Not really, I was fascinated. The more they poked the bear, the more I realized how much they needed this illusion of control. My house wasn't just a fence and a paint job to them. It was an existential threat. Still, Karen wasn't done. One night I found a flyer taped to my gate. Urgent HOA special meeting. Agenda: unauthorized property and non-compliance actions. Time, date, and location were listed. The Whispering Pines Clubhouse. I wasn't invited, of course, but I went anyway. I didn't speak. I just stood in the back, arms crossed, while 30 people debated what to do about the architect. Karen had a slideshow. She described my fence as a militarized fortress and my house as a hostile structure. Someone suggested contacting zoning enforcement. Another said they should just tear it down. I smiled the whole time, because what they didn't know was this: every minute of that meeting was recorded on my phone, tucked into my jacket pocket. Every baseless threat, every laugh about scaring him into compliance, every lie preserved. I left that clubhouse with a camera full of evidence, and I knew sooner or later Karen was going to make a move so stupid, so brazen, that all of it would pay off. I just had to let her. It was a Thursday morning, early spring. Cold enough for frost on the windows, but not enough to keep me from enjoying coffee out on the porch. I'd just finished reviewing some client renderings when I heard it. A low mechanical rumble, unnatural, too aggressive for morning traffic. I stepped outside in my flannel robe and slippers and froze. A full-sized bulldozer was crawling up my driveway. Behind it trailed a white pickup with HOA contracting services emblazoned on the door. And walking directly in front of it, as if leading a victory parade, was Karen Dalton herself. Clipboard in one hand, latte in the other, smile like a smug cartoon villain. I walked out to meet them, still in my robe, heart rate steady but rising. The driver stopped the bulldozer about 20 feet from the gate. Karen didn't. "Good morning, Mr. Gray," she chirped. "We're here to begin corrective measures per HOA Resolution 12B. "You're out of your mind," I said flatly. She gestured to the clipboard as if waving holy scripture. "Your continued refusal to comply has left us no choice. Under community enforcement protocol." "I'm not under your community," I snapped. "This is private land. I'm not in your HOA. You're trespassing." Karen smiled like she was talking to a toddler. "Your defiance has made that distinction irrelevant. The board held a vote last night. Unanimous. We're proceeding." The bulldozer revved behind her, a beast straining at the leash. My fists clenched. "Turn that machine around," I said, backing toward my porch. "Right now." Instead, she waved her arm, like Caesar at the Colosseum. The driver pushed the throttle. I heard metal screeching as the bucket lowered. It rolled forward, slow but deliberate, and with one awful metallic crack it punched straight into my front gate. The gate, custom forged, hand-installed over the course of 3 weeks, folded like tin foil. The sound of shearing steel and splintering wood was so violent, so obscene, that I didn't even register the shock at first. I just stood there. Then the fence went next. The dozer clawed through the paneling, tearing apart a section that had taken me days to align. The reinforced glass shattered like ice under boots. Chunks of charred cedar and bent brackets rained down onto my driveway. I finally snapped into motion. I grabbed my phone, started recording, and dialed its 911T with the other hand. "I need police dispatched immediately," I said, keeping my voice level as the dozer kept chewing through my perimeter. "My property is being destroyed by unauthorized contractors under orders from someone who has no legal authority to be here." "Are they still on site?" the dispatcher asked. "Oh yeah," I said, flipping the camera toward Karen, "and they brought a goddamn tank." Karen turned, noticing the phone. Recording me without consent is a violation of HOA bylaws, she said smugly. So is demolishing a 6-figure gate, I replied. 15 minutes later, 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled up, lights flashing. Officers stepped out, confused at first. Who wouldn't be seeing a bulldozer halfway through a designer fence on a residential property? I walked over, still barefoot, and handed them my property deed and the file folder I kept in my kitchen for moments just like this. Karen started talking immediately. This is all within HOA enforcement rights. He has refused to comply for months. We gave notice. We voted. The lead officer held up a hand. Ma'am, do you have a court order authorizing forced entry or demolition? Karen blinked. It was a board resolution. Unanimous. That's not what I asked. I could see the cracks forming in her face. We've warned him repeatedly. She tried again. He's a visual nuisance. The board... Ma'am, the officer cut in, his voice growing firmer. Unless you have a court-issued writ of enforcement or injunction, this is destruction of private property. You don't get to bulldoze someone's home because you dislike their taste in fences. The second officer took statements while I showed him my security footage. High-def video of the entire incident. Karen giving the signal, the driver proceeding, the gate being torn apart piece by piece. His eyebrows rose higher with every minute. The officers separated us, took statements, and then instructed the driver to power down and stay put. Karen, now visibly sweating, kept insisting it was all a misunderstanding. The word protocol left her lips no fewer than 5 times. By the time the sheriff's department finished taping off the scene, half the neighborhood had gathered to watch. Phones out, whispers everywhere. Karen tried to act like she was still in control, chin up, arms crossed, but it was obvious. The Queen had just bulldozed her own throne. The dozer was impounded, the contractor taken in for questioning. And Karen. She was told she'd be hearing from the district attorney. As for me, I stood there in the wreckage of my gate, still holding my phone, camera still rolling, calmly adding every detail to the growing archive of madness. It had finally happened. She'd gone too far. And now I had her exactly where I wanted. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of saws and drills. For a split second, I thought maybe the HOA had returned with more machinery, but no. This time, it was my own people. My gate contractor, a seasoned ex-Marine named Jules, had shown up early with his crew, ready to assess the damage and start the estimate. He whistled low when he saw the crater where the gate used to be. Looks like a war zone, he muttered, running his hand over the splintered wood and twisted metal. You want full replacement? No, I said. I want it better. And I want the bill to be a legal exhibit. Within 2 hours, the damages were formally appraised at $376,000. That included the original materials, labor, architectural work, reinstallation, disposal of debris, and the cost of additional security. I took that report straight to Nora. She didn't even blink. We're going scorched earth. Good, I said. She already tried that. We filed a civil suit the same day, not just against Karen, but against the HOA itself and the contractor they hired. Charges included destruction of private property, trespassing, unauthorized demolition, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Nora also added a clause seeking punitive damages. Let's give the court a reason to make an example of her, she said. They love precedent. News traveled fast. The local paper ran a headline the next morning. Architect's gate destroyed by HOA bulldozer. Lawsuit filed. Within 48 hours, a local news crew was on my lawn. I gave a short deadpan interview while standing in front of the wreckage. Yes, the gate was expensive, I said. So is justice. Karen, of course, tried to spin it. She released a statement through the HOA calling the incident a miscommunication and claimed that temporary visual disruptions sometimes happen when maintaining community standards. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Nora filed a temporary restraining order, preventing Karen or any HOA agents from coming within 50 feet of my property. 3 days later, we received word. The court had agreed to fast-track the case due to the level of property damage. Hearing set in 2 weeks. The HOA's board immediately went into panic mode. I started receiving polite, almost pleading emails from other members. Can we talk? And this has all been a misunderstanding. Too late. At the first preliminary hearing, Karen arrived in a beige pantsuit that matched her moral flexibility. She was flanked by 2 attorneys, neither of whom looked particularly pleased to be there. She sat across from me and tried to avoid eye contact, but her jaw clenched every time Nora spoke. We presented the security footage, the estimate report, the deed, the boundary surveys, and, for good measure, the audio recording of the HOA meeting where she'd casually suggested just tearing it down. Her lawyers tried to argue that she believed in good faith that the property fell under HOA jurisdiction. That's when Nora dropped the hammer. She pulled out a certified copy of the original Whispering Pines development agreement, which explicitly excluded my lot. Then she introduced email evidence showing that Karen had been notified of this fact over 6 months prior, including by her own board counsel. So she knew, the judge asked. She knew, Your Honor, Nora said. Karen's face started to collapse under the weight of her mistake. The judge leaned back, looked over his glasses, and said, I'm inclined to let this go to trial. There's more than enough evidence to support the claims. Karen's lawyers requested a recess. Outside the courtroom, a junior board member named Greg caught up to me in the parking lot. I just want you to know, he said awkwardly, not all of us agreed with what she did. She pushed it through in an emergency vote. Most of us didn't even read the contractor paperwork. Too late for that now, I said, not unkindly. He nodded, eyes down. By the end of the week, several homeowners from Whispering Pines had started reaching out to Nora, not in defense of Karen, but to ask if they could review their own property agreements. Apparently, people had started wondering just how legitimate their HOA's authority really was. I filed those emails too, not as evidence, as the first tremors. Because something bigger was starting to crack. And it wasn't just my gate anymore. The courthouse was packed. It wasn't just lawyers and the usual shuffle of small claims and family disputes. There were neighbors, reporters, 2 college kids live streaming the whole thing under the tag Nurture Bulldozer Karen. Someone even brought popcorn. Subtle. I showed up in a tailored black suit, freshly pressed shirt, and custom cufflinks shaped like little wrought iron gates. Petty? Yes. Satisfying? Absolutely. Karen arrived 15 minutes late, visibly shaken but trying to hold herself together. She wore a light gray suit and what looked like a fresh spray tan. She sat stiffly, surrounded by 2 new attorneys, older, more serious, but visibly exhausted. This wasn't just about a property dispute anymore. It was a full-blown trial. Nora started strong. She laid out the narrative like a war crime documentary, calm, factual, brutal in its precision. Every exhibit had its moment. High-resolution footage of the bulldozer plowing into my gate, copies of all correspondence, the audio from the HOA meeting where Karen suggested the demolition as if she were ordering lunch, and finally the development map, crystal clear in its exclusion of my property from HOA jurisdiction. Then came the kicker. Karen's own emails. Recovered during discovery where she acknowledged that my property was exempt but wrote, "We can't let this stand. The board has to act, or we look weak." The judge asked her to confirm the authenticity. She didn't speak, just nodded once, jaw locked. The room shifted. Karen's attorneys tried to spin a narrative around community interest and misunderstood boundaries. They even tried a Hail Mary about implied inclusion due to visual proximity, which made the judge raise an eyebrow so high I thought it would detach from his face. Nora stood up, calm as ever. "With respect, Your Honor," she said, "if looking at a thing you don't like gave you legal power over it, we'd all be bankrupt from HOA warfare. This isn't about boundaries, it's about abuse of authority and malice." Then she paused, not dramatically, just long enough to let it settle, and added, "And ego." Gasps, murmurs. A woman in the back actually clapped once before realizing she was in court. The judge called for a recess. During the break, Karen tried to approach me in the hallway. She stopped 2 feet away, eyes hollow, voice lower than I'd ever heard it. "This has gone too far," she said. "You're destroying me over a fence." I didn't flinch. "No, Karen. You did that when you brought a bulldozer to a property dispute you had no authority to start." She turned and walked away. When we reconvened, the prosecution called 3 surprise witnesses, neighbors from Whispering Pines, people I'd never spoken to but who'd apparently had enough of Karen's reign. The first was a retired Marine named Hank who'd been fined for flying the American flag without board approval. The second was a single mother who got threats of liens because her son left a scooter in the front yard. The third was an elderly man who broke into tears describing how Karen had berated him in front of guests for painting his mailbox the wrong shade of forest green. Each story chipped away at her image. Each story painted the same picture: an HOA run like a dictatorship with Karen as its unelected queen. Then came Greg, the junior board member. He walked up, placed a handwritten statement in the clerk's hands, and testified under oath that Karen had forged 3 signatures under dishonest on the demolition authorization, bypassing a required vote. Gasps again. The judge leaned forward. "You're confirming that Mrs. Dalton falsified HOA documentation?" "Yes, Your Honor, I saw her do it. She said it was just paperwork and told me not to be soft." Karen buried her face in her hands. The court went silent. The verdict came at the end of the 3rd day. Karen Dalton was found personally liable for destruction of private property, abuse of authority, and fraudulent documentation. The HOA was found complicit through negligence and failure to supervise. The judgment: $1,050,000. In total compensation, $376,000 for reconstruction, $124,000 in legal fees, $250,000 in punitive damages, and a full $300,000 for emotional distress and reputational harm. On top of that, Karen was permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in the state. The HOA was ordered to undergo no full third-party audit and no mandatory restructuring. HOA Contracting Services, the demolition company, was referred to the district attorney for operating without proper municipal clearance. Karen stood frozen as the judge read the ruling. Then she broke. She screamed, not words, just noise. One of her lawyers tried to calm her down, but she slapped his hand away. She looked around the courtroom like it had betrayed her. When the judge warned her for outbursts, she called him a clown in a robe. That earned her a $10,000 contempt fine. On the spot, security escorted her out, shaking and shouting about how the whole neighborhood will fall apart without order. I sat silently, hands folded, while Nora packed up the case files with the smug grace of a lioness licking her chops. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. I gave them a short statement. Property rights matter. Abuse of power has consequences, and fences, no matter how threatening, don't bulldoze themselves. Within 72 hours of the verdict, the fence was back up, and it was magnificent. Jules and his crew pulled double shifts, this time with a little extra flair. We didn't just rebuild, we upgraded. Reinforced steel beams, tempered mirrored glass that shifted tint with the sun, and a redesigned gate with an automatic hinge system that whispered instead of groaned. At night, it glowed softly with programmable LEDs. I set them to blood red for the first week. Petty, I know. But you bulldoze a man's art. You earn the color scheme. I mounted a plaque next to the keypad. It read, Karen's Folly. Rebuilt, reinforced, refined. The name caught on faster than I expected. A local newspaper did a follow-up titled, From Rubble to Revenge, The Architect's Victory. It made the rounds on Twitter and YouTube. Comments ranged from HOA Queen finally dethroned to Bro won HOA court like it was the Super Bowl. Memes appeared overnight. Karen photoshopped into a bulldozer screaming at my gate while it exploded behind her like an action movie. But what really surprised me wasn't the internet. It was the neighbors. People started coming by, not with pitchforks and Facebook rage, but with coffee, apology baskets, and awkward gratitude. The same people who used to whisper about the dark house on the hill now wanted to talk. One guy, Steve, 2 streets over, brought over a six-pack and confessed he'd once voted to issue me a citation for unfriendly facade choices. Was scared of her, he said, shrugging. We all were. I shrugged back. Fear makes people beige. He didn't laugh, but he got it. And then came the real shift. Word spread that Karen's actions had forced the court to review all HOA authorizations and filings from the past 3 years. Turns out my property wasn't the only one they'd tried to rope in through aggressive reinterpretations of covenants. By the end of the month, 18 homeowners, to no more suts, had formally withdrawn from the HOA. Some realized their lots had never legally belonged to it in the first place. Others simply had enough. Armed with lawyers and inspired by my case, they filed opt-outs, challenged covenants, or just stopped paying dues altogether. The HOA, now under temporary third-party oversight, couldn't stop them. Then came the resignations. 2 board members quit. One of them wrote a resignation letter that ended with the words, "This is not a homeowners association. It's been a homeowners hostage situation." A few weeks later, Whispering Pines held a special election to form a new board under court-mandated supervision. I wasn't eligible, not being an HOA member, but they asked if I'd sit in as a community design advisor. I declined politely. I had no interest in committees. They elected a woman named Nadine, a local interior designer who wore mismatched earrings and owned a turquoise VW Beetle. She ran unopposed on a platform of freedom, transparency, and individual taste. First thing she did was repeal the mandatory approved beige palette. Second thing, she issued a formal public apology to me on behalf of the community. It ended with, "We've learned that good design is not a threat, but a bulldozer is." Honestly, it was the nicest apology I've ever received. Meanwhile, Karen quietly sold her house. The listing stayed up for 2 weeks. Charming HOA property, newly restructured leadership, peaceful neighborhood, excellent views. It didn't mention the court case, the fine, or the viral fame. But buyers knew. Oh, they knew. Last I heard, she moved to Arizona. No HOA, just desert silence and a long-ass driveway she'd have to sweep herself. And me? I enjoyed the quiet, until the mail arrived one morning with a thick envelope from a law school in Denver. Inside was a letter from a professor asking if they could use my case in their property rights and HOA's unit. Attached was a photo of the class final, an essay question titled, "The Gate That Launched a Revolution." I laughed for 5 full minutes. 6 months later, I threw a party. Not just any party, the first annual Independence from HOA celebration. hosted right on my newly landscaped front lawn under the glowing arc of Karen's Folly. We had music, food trucks, and custom t-shirts that read, "I survived the beige rain." Jules even parked a rented bulldozer by the driveway wrapped in caution tape, with a sign on it that said, "Do not operate without a court order." People came out in droves. Old neighbors, new neighbors, folks from surrounding communities, even a few lawyers from Nora's firm who brought champagne and bad HOA jokes. Kids ran under the red lights of the gate like it was a carnival ride. At one point, someone projected a slideshow of before and after images from the neighborhood onto the side of my house. Dull, uniform homes now transformed with color, character, and personality. There was the lavender Victorian on Ashwood Lane, the guy who painted his garage door with a Van Gogh mural, a bungalow with bright orange trim and matching flower boxes. People weren't just reclaiming their properties. They were reclaiming joy. Nadine gave a short, nervous speech. She wasn't much for crowds, but her message was clear. When the rules become more about fear than function, it's time to change them. We don't want clones. We want neighbors. The applause lasted 3 solid minutes. Sometime around sunset, Steve, the six-pack guy, came up beside me. We stood there sipping beer, watching a pack of kids invent some lawn game that involved frisbees, glow sticks, and 0 rules. "You really started something here," he said. I shook my head. "Karen did." He laughed. "True, but you finished it." Before he left, he handed me a small wooden sign. On it, laser-burned in bold font, were the words, "My gate, my rules." I hung it the next day, just above the keypad. Weeks passed. The neighborhood found its rhythm again, looser, lighter, less twitchy about mailbox shapes and lawn heights. I kept mostly to myself, though I'd get the occasional nod or compliment about the lights or questions about where to buy non-HOA-approved house paint. Karen never came back, but her legacy, ironically, became freedom. Not because of her leadership, but because she finally pushed people hard enough to say, no. Now every morning I step outside, sip my coffee, and look out at my gate. Solid, unyielding, beautiful. A monument not to resistance, but to persistence. To the idea that ownership means something, that just because someone with a clipboard says no doesn't mean they're right. And when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear it. The echo of steel on steel, the crunch of bulldozer treads, and the distant scream of a control freak losing her kingdom. It's the sound of freedom, and it never gets old.